One of the distinguished features of this conference is that it usually has an international dimension. And this is true of this year's conference. We have Canadian participants and guests, and two distinguished guests from Germany, whom I'll introduce in a second. But first, I have to say who I am. I'm Sergei Kahn, professor of anthropology at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. My Tlingit names are Gunak from the Duck-Haledi Kilauea clan, and Shakunda Stu from the Sitka Box House, Kagwantan, through adoption. I've been studying Tlingit history and culture for the past 45 years. And this afternoon, I'll be talking about the next project, a book that's coming out on the Merrill photographs. So this was a brief commercial break. Our guests, Gudrun, Bucher and Ivonne Kaiser, come all the way from Oldenburg, Germany, where they are affiliated with Natur und Mensch, Museum of Natural History and Ethnology. And they will share with us a fascinating story of early Tlingit artifacts and art pieces at that small German museum. So the title of their talk, Russian America in Oldenburg, Germany. And please welcome our German guests. Willkommen.
In German, we say Danke instead of Gunnar Cheese. So let us introduce ourselves briefly. We start with my colleague Gudrun.
So I'm Gudrun. I am a cultural anthropologist, and I worked with collections for many years from both sides of the Bering Sea.
And my name is Ivonne. I'm an archaeologist, an art historian, and historian. That's what I'm trained. And I work at the Oldenburg Museum since 2019. And just briefly with the collection we are going to introduce to you today. But already I can say thank you very much for all who have been sharing their knowledge so far with us, from museums, from corporations, people here, and now sharing their thoughts about what we are doing. So, and I will encourage you all to come to us later on, talk to us, write to us, whatever your opinion is on this. So I'll have to put on my glasses because otherwise I won't see anything. The content of our talk will be to introduce the museum to you briefly, because we are already almost opposite of the world from where we are here now, then the history of the collection, and then in special the Kuprianov collection, which is the Alaska collection we have, and then the current project we have, which is called Devias. But where are we exactly? Here you have like a map of Europe, and you see Germany over here, and Oldenburg is this little red spot over there, which is quite close to the Northern Sea. But if you now and go to look up where Oldenburg is on your mobile devices, be sure to have the right Oldenburg, because there's a second city with the same name a little bit farther north. So make sure when you look it up that it's Oldenburg in Oldenburg. And this is where it is. It's very close to Bremen, Hamburg, And you see we are roughly about 40 miles from the shoreline of the Northern Sea. Over here you have the British Isles. Oldenburg's a very small place compared to cities in the United States. Not maybe compared to Sitka, but to other cities you have. So we have a total of 39.75 square miles. We are at an elevation of 13 feet, so we're really flat. And the population is, and this is now what makes it special, 172,000 people. And you see how densely we are populated. There are no major industries up in the north. It's dairy and pig farming that people do for a living. And then there is a lot of administration centered there. But now the museum's history in the 19th century. When the museum was first put up in 1836, it was founded by the Grand Duke, which was a normal thing to do in those times. And it was just one story here in this building. This was enough space for the small collection they had. And the aim was collecting regional and local items of the natural environment there. There was never intended in the first place to have an ethnographic collection. So they were collecting plants, animals, fossils, minerals, things that was in the natural surrounding. And then they bought collections from collectors, great bird collections people were interested in for many years. And then they got a lot of gifts from teachers, from pharmacists, doctors, so all people who were involved in studying things. And of course, from the aristocratic relatives of the Grand Duke's family. And then something happened in 1841 or 1843, the arrival of the first ethnographic items, and these are these items from Alaska. And we come to this later on, because if you read here, it says St. Petersburg, and it says Prince Peter of Oldenburg, and he was at the same time a relative of the Tsar in St. Petersburg and a nephew of the Grand Duke of Oldenburg, who has just set up the museum. So he was in a position when the collection arrived with Kuprianov in St. Petersburg to say, hey, my uncle has just set up a new museum and he needs some stuff for it, so could you give me part of the collection? And that's what happened. And then from 1867 onwards, they were getting more ethnographic items and they really started a small collection. But to put it in perspective, what we do have is about 500,000 specimens from the natural history. We have about 500,000 archaeological artifacts, and we have all in all about 7,000 ethnographic objects. So this makes just 3% of the whole collection. But anyway, in 1880, this one story in this building I've shown before was too small to house the collection, and so they built a new museum, and this is where we are still today. It opened in 1880, and then from 1883 onwards, Germany became a colonial power, especially in Africa, and that's when the ethnographic collection gained more items because people were there in military campaigns. They went there for doing business, and of course, they all brought back things with them, which they shouldn't have, but they did it. And then they ended often up in the houses of the peoples, and their children or grandchildren didn't know what to do with them, and they gave them to the museum. So that's how the ethnographic collection really started, and this was till the end of the First World War. Germany had to give up all the colonies, and with then there were little, from that onwards, little increase of the ethnographic collection really was. In 1930, the state of Oldenburg took over the museum from the Grand Duke. This didn't improve anything. There had never been much money for this museum, and it never really got better. Then, after the Second World War, Oldenburg first became part of the Hanover state, and then in November of 1946, the state Lower Saxony was founded, including the former territory of Oldenburg and Hanover, and some other small communities. And since then, the museum functioned as a multidisciplinary state museum. But state museum, it's quite mocking because we have no funding, we have no money, so. These are the three men who were involved in founding the museum. And this person here in the center, who is Alexander Baron von Rennenkampf, who was really behind the founding of the museum. Of course, this is the Grand Duke, and his name is on the formal signing of the opening of the museum, but von Rennenkampf, who was an aristocrat from the Baltic Sea, who got acquainted with Paul Friedrich August when he was doing his military training in Russia with his relatives. So the both men got acquainted, and Rennenkampf followed Paul August to Oldenburg and stayed as his chamberlain. And then this person here was the first curator. He became curator in 1937, and he stayed there all his life till his death in 95. He was a teacher by profession, so not really highly educated in these times. But he had a passion for this natural history collection, and especially for birds. And that's where he put all his efforts in. The aim of the founding of this museum was what all European museums did in the 19th century. They started as coming like the bourgeoisie or the middle class empowered themselves to become more rights, to get better education. And this is why museums were set up, to educate the people. Now we have a look behind the scenes. So this is what is our usual business, like these herbaria you see here, so like plants you have, or this big collection of insects, and then the Yupi'k, the first curator's passion, which were birds. Today, the exhibition is in like these 3 stories, and these mirror the 3 landscapes we have in northern Germany. You have a lot of the moor or bog landscapes, and this is what they are trying to show on the ground floor. Then you have the marshland and the shoreline on the first floor, and this is like a section through a dike or embankment to prevent the sea from coming into the land. And on the second story, you have this model of a big stone grave. This was a landscape that was formed by the Ice Age, bringing all those stones from Scandinavia. And this was really a safe territory to settle on and to bury your people in those big stone tombs. And then we have this room, which was set up in the 1970s, so 50 years ago. And this should remember how the first museum, what it looked like. Like you have like these old cases there where you exhibit these natural items. And then what they did, you see here those African shields and spears on the wall. They had this little show of ethnographica in this room set up. Because we think this is a very colonial thing to do. We had taken this part of the collection out there last year. So when you come to Oldenburg today, you won't see any ethnographic items in the museum anymore. But till last year, you could even see here the Alaska collection in these two cases. And still, we have photographs. I can show you that we have like this mask and those bowls and all of this, what is here. But Gudrun will show you the objects in a much better way. A last thing before we come to Kuprianov, just to show it to you again, is how the relatives, how the family ties between Oldenburg, which is on that side, with the founder of the museum, Paul Friedrich August, and Tsar Alexander I in Russia, and Prince Peter, who took the Kuprianov collection and gave it to Oldenburg, was a nephew to Alexander I, and he was a nephew to the Grand Duke of Oldenburg. And so this is finally why the collection came to us, and we are able to talk about it today. And now I hand this over to Gudrun.
Yeah, as you have heard from Ivonne, the collection was brought to St. Petersburg first, and this was done by Ivan Antonovich Kuprianov. Kuprianov was one of the governors of Russian America, but one you won't hear very much about. He was squeezed in between Wrangel, who is much more famous, and Etolin, who is also much more famous compared to Kuprianov. Kuprianov was born in 1794 or 99, that's not quite sure, but at a very early age he entered the Naval Cadet School in St. Petersburg and became a naval person. So when he was maybe 20, maybe 25, we do not know exactly, he for the first time circumnavigated the Earth in the expedition of Fabian von Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev. This was the expedition that discovered the Antarctic continent. So before he came to Sitka, he had seen quite a bit of the world. He also took part in another round-the-world voyage and was active in the Navy all his life until he became appointed governor of Russian America. So in the year 1835, he traveled all the way overland to Siberia, and then from Okhotsk at the coast, he went over to Sitka. Here I show you a sketch of the time. The governor's building needed renovation at the time. Wrangel had started to do this renovation, and Koprianov went on to make this a better living place for him and his family. Together with the collection came two important documents for us. The one document is a letter written by a certain Count Tolstoy. And this letter reveals a lot about the collection, but conceals important information. Tolstoy just wrote his family name, and as you can imagine, the Tolstoy is a huge family line within Russia, and it took us a lot of time to find out which Tolstoy finally wrote this letter. But it was Pavel Dmitrievich Tolstoy, and he worked as a steward for the Prince Peter of Oldenburg. And he was acquainted with von Rennenkampf. So the steward of Prince Peter asked, or was in contact with von Rennenkampf. Von Rennenkampf asked, if you have interesting natural history items from Russia, from the colonies, from whatsoever, please do not forget that we have this newly founded museum in Oldenburg. And this way it happened that Koprianov, when he came back from his time as a governor, he arrived in June 1841 in St. Petersburg. And then we have a date on this letter. It's late October, but what Tolstoy conceals is the year. So we do not know when exactly he wrote that letter. It might have been in October 41. But the first records within the museum and first inventory was done in 43. So we do not know, was the collection 2 years waiting in St. Petersburg? Was it already in Oldenburg until it became inventorized? So there are a few open questions. But still, we do get a little bit of information. He explains how to deal with the items made from intestines, because nobody knew in Oldenburg at the time what this material is like and how you would deal with it, that it doesn't get brittle and break. He also speaks about a book that came out shortly before he had written that letter, and he says, I sent this book, and this gives more detailed information than I can give you, so look up that book. Unfortunately, he doesn't mention the name of the book. There's no book of this time in the museum. There's nothing in the library, so we just can have guesses. Maybe it was the voyage of Fyodor Littke, but we do not know. It's just a guess. And then he starts talking more and more about the natural history items, because those at the time were held in higher esteem compared to the ethnographic items, but this has changed today considerably. So we are not able to identify the natural history items, but we still can identify the ethnographic part of the collection. And he says that the items were transported via a steamboat from St. Petersburg to Lübeck and from there overland to Oldenburg. In addition, with this letter, Count Tolstoy also sent a list of the objects, of the items, a catalog, written also in French, like the letter. And at the time, the people in Oldenburg made a German translation of that list. But as you might see, the French, it's just in Latin letters, it's easy to read. The German is a little bit more difficult because the handwriting changed in the meantime. But the title is Catalogue of the Diverse Productions of the Inhabitants of the Aleutian Islands, brought by Colonel Koprianov, there in the French spelling, from his voyage around the world. And this list is structured in different sections, and one section is clothing, another one is arrows, another one is models, another one is different products of the Kolosh. This is how the inhabitants of the coast of Russian America are called. So this is a quote from this catalog. And then one chapter is clothing for men made from reindeer hide. Then it goes on with containers, products of the peoples inhabiting the banks of the Kviapoka, that is how the Russians called the Yukon at the time, and the Kuskokwim near Bering Strait, clothing of these peoples, California, seabirds from the Russian colonies. So you can see that they tried somehow to structure it, but it's not consistent. Yeah, it's partly geographic, partly functional, so yeah. But at least we know what we should have. Unfortunately, so altogether there were sent 137 objects. You can read that here. So it were 89 numbers in the ethnographic part, and then came the stuffed birds and other natural history items. Unfortunately, of those, we only have 78 items at present. All the feather work is gone. So in the list are mentioned many headdresses and also garments made of feathers, but they all have disappeared. So a big part of the collection, like in many other ethnographic collections, is arrows, harpoons, arrowheads, and bird spears. We have 21 items of clothing, 8 related to water transport, that means boat models and paddles and so on. Unfortunately, no whole-scale boat. There was one on the list, but this also is gone. Bowls, basket, one chilkat blanket, a mask, and the rest is, yeah, this and that. It's mixed. So I want to show you, to share with you a few photographs of the items we have, as we do not know where they were collected. We know it was before 1840, so the collection is really one of the oldest still present, but we do not know where exactly, so yeah, we have to guess what we have there. So this wooden bowl, it's about this size, so 30 to 40 centimeters wide. Very few items have been published before. So in the old publication, it says maybe it's a grizzly of the sea. It's not very sure. Is it Tlingit? Is it not? So if you have any guesses, we would be very open to your suggestions, to your ideas related to all these items we have there. There's another wooden bowl, and there's this bird beak and sticking something out, maybe swallowing an animal, a worm or a dragonfly. So here you on the top right, you can see the underside of this part, and here you have the design also on the underside of that bowl. Then there's another wooden bowl, Anna Gunther called the style in which it's carved Tlingit Aleut, because maybe the lines, the dotted lines in there indicate that it's maybe Sugpiaq origin. So we presume that many items were acquired in Sitka at the time, but they could have been made easily by Sugpiaq, who had been brought by the Russians to work for them also in Sitka. So there are many open questions. Then another wooden bowl with a creature. We do not know, is it a skay, is it a sculpin, is it a ray? But at least it's incredibly nicely decorated. Everybody likes it in the collection, but still many open questions. Then we have a few bowls from, as indicated in the list, from the Yukon or Kuskokwim region. Maybe this even comes from Nunivak Island. I think it's probably a Yupi'k bowl. And we have a similar one, a little bit bigger, with this small sea otter in the center. As I told you, we have many pieces of clothing, so this brings us in the region of the Dena'ina. We have this tunic, and going with it these moccasin pants, and this tunic had been decorated nicely with porcupine quill and seeds, what you see on the left side. Unfortunately, most of it is gone. It's only, so the whole, this lines here was decorated, but we only have a very little remains of that porcupine quill. There's one interesting feature. It's this hanger over there. You normally wouldn't have a hanger at your tunic at the time. And I just want to show it. Here is a close-up. Remember it, I come back to it a little bit later. So we have a few boat models, here a canoe. There's also a discussion whether it's Tlingit or Haida, whether it's the sea wolf, Wasco, or just a wolf. But interestingly, there is a carving of faces. I hope you can see it here in the snout and the ear of that wolf's face. Then we do have several Baidaka models, one of them maybe from Nunivak Island, maybe from the Kuskokwim River. But the interesting thing there is that it has a hole in the front and in the back part, and I'm looking through catalogs and other museum collections, but I never found a similar item to this. So these are the models. We have an original size, close crown triangular hat, a hunting hat, probably from the Yupi'k. Then we have a few baskets, one rattle-lid basket, probably from the Tlingit. I really would like to know what it's inside the lid, what makes the rattling, but until now we do not have the funding to make more research on that. Then we do have spruce wood baskets. They probably are Sugpiaq. They are all decorated with false embroidery, and they do have the rings on the bottom, which indicates that they are most probably from the Sugpiaq. Here is another version, another basket, and also there you can see the rings on the bottom. Then we do have a slate armor. I put in the right corner the one I saw here in the Sheldon Jackson Museum. This one is what was brought by Kuprianov via St. Petersburg to Oldenburg, and also there are many open questions. We just do not know where exactly this was collected. And this is our riddle piece. There's a very similar piece in St. Petersburg in the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, and there it says it was used by the Unangax women for sewing. So they stick it into the ground, and they fixed what they were doing, maybe gut sewing, maybe sinews they were twining on that thing, but nobody really understands how it might have worked. But the decoration which is on this item indicates that it comes from the Pribilov Islands, because there the whole story of clubbing of fur seal is in this item. So then we have this fur scraper, or maybe it's an ulu, which is also quite difficult, but it has the ochre and the brown embellishments, and the handle is in the bird shape. We used to have two masks, one male, one female. Where the female mask is gone, we do not know. We do not know when it disappeared from the museum, but it was on the original list. This is the remaining mask we have in the collection. And this is one of our, probably most precious items, this Chilkat blanket. And I showed you the hanger on the Dena'ina tunic. And if you look here at the corner, you see very similar things. Here you have a few more details of the Chilkat blanket. And this is the back side, but where is the hanger gone? Because I did have a detail, but it doesn't matter. But you can see here, this is in the very same style. So this leads me to presume that these items weren't directly collected by Kuprianov. They were probably displayed in the governor's house, because in only one source I found an indication there was a small museum in the governor's house. They mainly displayed naval instruments, but these hangers lead me to think that they might have been also a small ethnographic collection in the governor's house, and that Kuprianov, just when he left when he left Sitka, he just amassed things from there and brought them with him. Because his predecessor, Wrangel, had brought a nice collection. Etolin, when he was for the first time in Sitka, had brought a nice collection. So he couldn't come back with empty hands, probably. And I think maybe he did it the easy way. So here you have the backside of the Chilkat blanket. And to conclude, we have items from more or less all over what was Russian America at the time. The green triangles show where Kuprianov himself traveled, but we have many items from other regions, so probably the people he sent out for exploring also brought items from their voyages. But the proof is still to be found to that. And there's another person I really, it's most wanted for me. It's Johan Forsman, one of the Finns. He lived in Sitka at the time. When Kuprianov was there, he lived there as a trader. Later, he went on to the Kuril Island and worked there for the Russian-American company, but he traded also ethnographic items, because Ilya Voznesensky, who came after Kuprianov and made a huge, huge collection for the Russian museums, in this collection it's indicated that he bought some of the items from Johan Forsman. So if anybody just knows something about this person, I would be most happy. And I wish I could travel back in the time to have a look in the governor's house and to see whether there really was an exhibit or not. And with this, I hand over back to Ivonne.
So, no, not finished yet, because now we're coming to the part where we really need your help. This is the digitization project, DVS, which we are undertaking currently. And this is digitization, visualization, and analysis of the collection. And as a case study, because it's so important, we have taken the Kuprianov collection at the Oldenburg Museum. And you see we have quite few project partners we're working together. For me, the most important one is the Jade University of Applied Studies, and there the Department of Photogrammetry. We are doing data science as well, but that shouldn't concern us here. Why did we choose this collection? It's because the materiality of the collection is so special, because it's so old. It is a materiality you wouldn't find nowadays here, and it's over there in Europe. And now how to bring it to your knowledge, that you can work with the collection. What can we do what serves your needs? So this is what we are concerned about in the project. Here you see my colleague Simon from the Jade University doing some hand scanning of the objects we have just seen. Yeah, here you see this little movie, how he is going along with the hand scanner and this boat model. What I learned so far from the talks we had here, what is important for the artists here working with the material is to know the backside of the things, that you can turn it. Then, especially with those boats, that you have a look inside, and this is what we are trying to do, what we are working on. You see, especially here in the mask, you see that it might have been worn because there are little darker parts where you had it on your face. Or if you look into these boats, he has not figured out yet. We just started in the beginning of this year with this project, how to get inside, but he's working so that there will be views of the insides of those boat models that shows how they were manufactured, how they were done, so that this knowledge can go back to the different communities where the items come from. And then, of course, it goes in all kinds of data sheets to work with. And what we are doing as a museum, we have like this Lower Saxony museums database where all objects from our country should go in. But of course, this is a database that fits the need of every small museum you have in Lower Saxony, and not just for our collection. So it's like object name, general information, history of the object, further references, administrative data. This is what you usually get in databases. But now the question for you is, what would you need? You would be able, of course, to access this database from here, but then what would you look for in such a database? What should we provide that it makes it easy for you to access those objects? And that's why we are here too. So we learn from you what your needs in this respect are. And this, so we have some time for questions. I says, Gunnar Cheese, thank you for listening to us.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes, please, Bob.
This is the most information that I've heard on this collection. I'm very excited about this presentation. On top of Castle Hill was a museum that was founded by Russian America. And in 1867, the military came to Alaska and they went up to Castle Hill, the US Navy. A man named Lieutenant Fast took the whole collection, the whole museum collection on top of Castle Hill and sent it to New York, and it was sold to the Harvard Peabody Museum, known as the Fast Collection. The question I have is in regard to a curator whose name was Ilya Voznesensky. There is so little known about Ilya Voznesensky, and I'm very interested in his life, his collection, his teachings. He collected for the museum in Russia. He collected for the museum here in Sitka. Is there any way, this is a theft of a whole museum from Sitka. And it would be wonderful to reestablish that museum in Sitka and bring that collection back home. And the history of that collection is lost. So the bits and pieces from you, the bits and pieces from Voznesensky collection, bits and pieces of the Sitka collection, we could come up with a very, I lack English, sorry. I come up with a very elaborate story of the Baronoff Museum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe shortly about Ilya Voznesensky. He grew up in St. Petersburg. He worked there as assistant in the Zoological Museum, and he was sent over to Russian America to bring together huge collections. His main focus was also on natural history, but he traveled a big amount. He spent 10 years here and traveled to California, traveled on the islands, traveled to the coast, to the Siberian coast, and brought together all these items. Many of them went over to St. Petersburg, but obviously something remained here back in Sitka. This just briefly, but it's just briefly to this.
Renaissance time of the Russian American.
Yeah, let me add something. We actually know quite a bit about Voznesensky. His biography was published in Russia, and if I'm not mistaken, it was translated into English and published. So we do know a lot. He did collect a wonderful array of Tlingit artifacts. He was also an artist. And his most famous drawing is of a funeral of a Kagwantan clan leader in Sitka. It's a really important piece done in the 1840s. As far as returning artifacts to Sitka, I don't know where the fast collection is right now, but if you're thinking, Bob, of any artifacts that went to St. Petersburg, forget about it. Russia does not believe in repatriation, and we will never see those objects come back. That's absolutely out of the question, unfortunately. And I just want to add something. These kinds of presentations and information we're getting from European museums like yours is very important, particularly right now, because you probably know that because of the war against Ukraine that Russia is waging, all academic scholarly exchange and visits between scholars of United States and other Western countries in Russia are over. They're not going to happen. Maybe things will improve when the war is over, but it's not clear when that will happen. And by the way, we have a catalog of all the beautiful early Tlingit artifacts from the St. Petersburg Museum of Anthropology. It's ready, it's been translated. It was paid for by the Alaska Heritage Institute. I wrote a lengthy introduction, and at the last moment when we were negotiating publication, that war started 2 years ago, and everything's up in the air. It's the only catalog of Alaska Native artifacts that has not been translated. All the others, Aleut, Alutiiq, Athabaskan, Sugpiaq, all of them have come out in English. So it's a really unfortunate consequence of Russian government's policies. Maybe one or two more questions before we adjourn. If not, oh, go ahead. Say something in German.
Vielen Dank, dass Sie alle hierher gekommen sind und uns zugehört haben. Dankeschön.
Bitte schön.
I said, Gunachchish Hatchi Adi.
Is it on? Okay. Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Eric Hollinger from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and we also have been experimenting with 3D digitization and replication work. We'll talk at 1:30 about a little bit of that. But your desire to see inside the objects, we have had success with CT scanning and X-rays. We have medical CT scanner and micro CT scanner. And I understand your museum is small, and you may not have that, but oftentimes we've seen other communities engage with the local hospital to use medical CT scanners, borrow time there, especially if they can do it as a pro bono kind of thing. With that, you should be able to see the entire structure of the interior of the bidarkas, how they're assembled, and you could even 3D print the structure without the skin on it with that access to that technology. So I suggest that approach. But great work.
Thank you very much.
And I do see, and Sergey, your comments are right, but I do see hope with 3D technology to bridge, even where repatriation is not accepted or in practice or required by law. It does give us another avenue that some of these museums, some of these governments may allow 3D digitization to allow us to bring them back in 3D digital form to study remotely and maybe even replicate to put things physically back in the hands. It's not the same thing, but it's getting closer. Gunakashish.